Good afternoon, and welcome back to the ADU track of the Boise Neighborhood Interactive. This is the second of three presentations by ADU Simplified. My name is Susan Eastlake. ADU Can I Do It will provide insight into owning, renting, and managing an ADU, the legal obligations of landlords and tenants, an introduction to the advantages of Section 8 voucher holders as tenants, and financing options for construction or remodeling loans for ADUs. We have a lot to cover, so let's get started. Our presenters will introduce themselves. Our first panel is Susan Brown, Mel Leviton, and Phyllis Barkett. Susan, please begin.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Susan Brown, and in this portion of the presentation, I was asked to speak on behalf of or as an ADU owner. So I thought much more interesting than looking at me talk, I would share some pictures of our project and just kind of tell you a little bit about how it came to be and kind of fast forward to how our visions of it being used for a group of people we hoped to serve happened. So I'm going to share my screen here. And then if somebody could be kind enough to confirm that you're able to see the PowerPoint, it just has the Welcome Boise Neighborhood Interactive logo. You guys can see that okay?
I see it.
Okay, thank you so much. So my husband and I had the opportunity to purchase a lovely home in Forest Grove, Oregon in 2013. For those of you who remember the economic cycle happening at that time, the real estate market was really suffering, interest rates were low, and we had an opportunity to buy this house. And this is a picture from approximately 1930 of what the home looked like. And I just want to point out very quickly, there's on the front lawn, you can potentially see the picture of a little girl. And I'm going to mention that little girl in my comments a little bit later in the presentation. Fast forward to about the 1970s, and somebody who has some experience with knowing the years of vehicles, you could probably exactly identify the year based on the vehicle in the driveway. But in this particular picture, I want to point out specifically the breezeway that got added between the garage and the house. That space became the access for this ADU, and this is the inside of the breezeway that was in existence at the time we purchased the property. And behind the cabinet in the right-hand corner is a dark cellar entryway to what was the basement of this beautiful Portland bungalow style house. So what we recognized is there was an opportunity in this particular property to add an additional expansion to the house. And we really had visions of being able to create a space that my husband and I would enjoy living in someday in the future. We wanted it to be a house that any family would enjoy living in. So we endeavored to create a new entrance to the basement area, and the porch to the house was totally deteriorating. So we decided to remove the porch, the concrete foundation to the porch, which I should add was completely filled to dirt, almost up to the floor joists that you can see exposed there. This is essentially what the project looked like from the exterior after it was completed. And this is the space under the porch now that became the access to the ADU that we created. It's safe, it's dry, it's secure, it's well lit, and it brought access to this space, which we completely gutted, as you can see. And the stairway on the left of the photo, That we left the stairs intact, but created a closet in that space. And this is what that space looks like today. Back around behind the refrigerator is the hallway that goes to a third bedroom, and then the bathroom suite, which has got 2 separate rooms, so multiple people can use that space at the same time. One of the things that was very important to us in creating this space is having an ability for people with disabilities to be able to enjoy living in this space if that opportunity for us ever arose. And so you can see the door room that's open. That door happens to be a wider width door for access for a wheelchair. All of them would accommodate it, but this one happens to have the extra wide door, as well as all of the hallways in the back and the entrance to the bathroom are wide as well. It turns out, just really quick then, this is the second half of the bathroom space that we created. It's got a door that opens in a very low profile so that a person would be able to easily step into the shower pan. And then this is the sink area for that space as well. And from the photo, you can see my arms, and I'm taking pictures from the lavatory room. So it's closed off so that multiple people can use that facility at the same time. Fast forward, we've rented the unit to college students mostly, but it turns out that the tenant that we have right now is undergoing unplanned back surgery and may very well end up in a wheelchair. So that person is in a position to be able to stay in this home without really any substantial modifications to the property, and being able to stay in the place that she wanted to live. It's been an unexpected opportunity to be a landlord. This is the only rental property that my husband and I own. The upstairs is also a 5-bedroom, 3-bath, 3,500 square foot house. This ADU turned out to be about 1,400 square feet, which is somewhat larger than what most ADUs are. But it's turned out to be an economic benefit to us. It's been a huge benefit in Forest Grove, where there is a livable size space for a family or a couple of college kids. And most importantly to us, it was an opportunity to create another residence where just about any person who wanted to rent could rent from us. Interestingly, this year, we also ended up accepting a tenant who, it's something like Section 8, but a little bit different from Section 8 housing. So we're accommodating a very low income individual with a disability, and it is going fine. I know there's a lot of trepidation, a lot of fear around renting to tenants who you haven't had the experience to be exposed to before. But for us, it's been an unexpected joy for us to be able to contribute to our neighborhood in a way that we can house practically any family who would want to be a renter with us. So I'm happy with that to answer any kind of questions that you might have about being a landlord or just owning an ADU, creating an ADU. Happy to answer whatever questions you might have.
Susan, Kevin Spencer here.
Hey, Kevin.
Hi. So my vision of ADUs has always been a detached structure, not necessarily something that's attached. So maybe talk about how it can be either or.
Right. You know, that's a great point, Kevin. The ADUs come in kind of all shapes and sizes. This one happens to be what we would in the professional parlance call an internal ADU. It's conversion of a space inside of a building. There's also an external ADU, which is attached to the existing structure. And then probably the one people that think about the most frequently is a detached ADU, which could be in the form of a garage conversion or what a lot of people would call a backyard cottage. It depending on the space available on your property, depending on, you know, this particular basement space for us, the ceilings, it was wasted space. It had low ceilings. It was creepy. I'll just say it was creepy. And you could tell from those pictures that I showed in the beginning, it was just a creepy place. And so with a little bit of work with kind of underpinning on the cement for the foundation and a little bit of work to raise up the beams, we were able to convert that space that really wouldn't have been able to be used for anything else and created one more very in need unit in the community. I hope that answers your question, Kevin.
Thank you, Susan. Can you all hear me now?
Hi, Susan.
Hi. I really apologize. I'm right here in City Hall in Boise, and they couldn't get me connected. So,
well, hi.
Hi. So thank you, Susan. If we can go to Mel now. Mel is a tenant, not of Susan's ADU, but a tenant of an ADU. So Mel, would you like to tell us about what you found beneficial about having an ADU as your home?
You bet. Thanks, Susan. And Susan, I loved your pictures of your ADU and how you built it. I actually have a tour of my ADU at 1:15 on Wednesday with the ADU design workshop. So gives you a different perspective of it. So yeah, we moved to Boise about 7 years ago. Really had a rough time finding anything I could get into. I use a small manual wheelchair. Managed to find something that worked okay, but it was much less than ideal. It was an older home, so it had very narrow doorways. The bathroom, I had to roll straight in and then roll straight out, and I couldn't turn either direction. It was interesting. So I've been in a wheelchair for about 20 years. And it was really a fluke that we even got into the place where we were. It was, you know how some things are, you just bump into the right person at the right time. And so we were really fortunate. The place we live in is 1,100 square feet. So again, bigger than what's typical, or what many people think of anyway as an ADU. It was originally built by the homeowner for his mother. So it's a cottage essentially behind what we call the big house. Then when it was sold, the current owner, his grandmother-in-law lived there until she passed away. And then it was rented out a few times, and he had just really wanted to rent it. The current owner just really wanted to rent it to somebody who could actually use the features in it. So it's got zero entrance. I go straight from my front porch into my house. There's no ramp, which is really nice. My bathroom is probably just the most exciting thing to me, because I can actually roll into the shower. So Susan, the pictures you were showing, you can't roll it into that shower in a wheelchair, but mine I actually can. So anyway, but there are other things about it that are not necessarily accessible, but that's a story for a different day. So the reason we rent really, for us, I mean, we've been homeowners before. We're kind of at the point in our life where it's just not, I mean, we could buy, but I'm not going to live another 30 years. Probably. I'm sure not going to have a job to pay a mortgage for another 30 years. So it's just not going to happen. So it's a good bet for us. The other thing that's great about it, and I have rented many times across the country and across Idaho. And there's always this fear of, you know, especially if your landlord's really close, that they're going to be incredibly annoying or prying in or walking into your house, and I've had a few landlords that were somewhat annoying. I've never had a horrible experience, and I've probably rented 30 houses, 40 houses in my life. But you know, my current landlord is, I mean, he's very sensitive. Like, he doesn't just come barging into my house ever. He really looks out for us, which is great, because if one of us has a fall and we're there alone, you know, he's right next door, and we've got his phone, we can message him, you know. And when we leave town, we know there's somebody there who, like, has a vested interest in the property being safe, right? And we feel the same way about his place. When he leaves town, you know, we keep an eye on it. And so it's just been a really mutual, beneficial thing for us. I worry as rents go up in the area that it's eventually going to be something that I don't know how we'll afford. He's been more than generous with not raising the rent as much as he could. But, you know, as taxes go up, how long does that last? I don't know. You know, we tease each other and act like we're family. He doesn't ever want me to refer to him as my landlord when he introduces me. You know, we're neighbors and that kind of thing. But at the same time, you know, people can't be just handing out housing either, right? So we do worry about it. I don't expect that we'll ever probably find such a great living situation as we have now. But then again, I didn't think we'd find this one either. So anyway, it's been a great thing for us. Generally, he fixes things pretty quickly. There are times I have to send him pictures over and over again of the flooding that coming through the ditch or whatever, but he finally gets it and he takes care of it. So, I mean, but overall, it's great. I don't have to worry about paying for the roof if it needs to be replaced. And he takes good care of it. He wants it to look nice because it's right behind his house. So anyway, that's been our experience, and it's been a good one.
Thank you so much, Mel. It sounds like we all need to come and see your house.
Pretty awesome. I'm telling you, do this ADU thing at 1:15 on Wednesday. You can come and see it without actually having to come.
Thank you. Phyllis, you're in the property management business, and would you please explain how you can, you know, help either the homeowner or the tenant in situations where, you know, they aren't as comfortable as obviously we've just heard from Mel and Susan.
Yeah. I mean, that was interesting what you said, Mel, because that is a common challenge, I would say. So some landlords or owners want to have more contact with tenants than others. So I try to figure that out first. And it does take some coaching because, in my opinion and in my experience as a property manager, it is good to have 1 degree of separation at least, so that all maintenance requests come through me and then I relay them to the owner. And so, yeah, I think that is important. However, I mean, we do have owners that do a really good job of getting to know their tenants because they want to, and also creating pretty good boundaries. But I would say more than not, it doesn't work out well. So I really do a lot of coaching.
Susan, what are the most often, I mean, Phyllis, what are the most often issues that you hear from either the owner of the real estate or the tenant?
Well, from the tenant, sometimes it's just the boundaries. Like, for example, they sometimes share yards, and that can be awkward. So I try and make it really clear. I try and learn from the owner what the clear boundaries are, even for the yard, for parking, and so on. And that helps because everybody knows their space. And then from the owner's side, I mean, you do see things that maybe are normal, but maybe you're a little attached. So it's still, it takes a little coaching sometimes to say this isn't doing anything bad to your property, but they need to have a little bit of privacy or space, and it's not hurting it. So I think just coaching the owners to relax and just trust that we can help manage it for them, then they'll send things through me and it's easier that way.
Do you have a particular document that both the landlord and the tenant agree to? I mean, is there some kind of standard arrangement that you have that fits most situations, where you tell, you know, the tenant that they're not to contact the landlord, for instance, they're to contact you? Or what kind of terms usually are there?
Yeah, I mean, I set that up. A lot of times it's addressed very clearly in their lease and in the owner's agreement. Each one of their responsibilities are spelled out pretty clearly. And then I remind them, or I teach the tenant, here's what you need to do if something goes wrong. You know, we use software that they can go into their portal and submit a maintenance request, and then I take it from there. So it's real business-like. And then I can send it to the owner. So it's pretty easy if you establish the boundaries.
Thank you very much for joining in on this discussion. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to the next part of our program, and that is legal obligations of landlords and tenants. And we're going to have Zoanne Olson present next. Zoanne, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Zoanne Olson. I'm the director of the Intermountain Fair Housing Council. I've been with the council for about 8 years, and prior to that, about 14 years with Idaho Legal Aid. And I'm just going to go over some resources. I'll put them in the chat after I speak, and then I'll upload them into the profile. So if you want to refer to them later, you can upload them. So the first thing I want you to know is that if you're going to rent an ADU, it is really important to know fair housing and landlord tenant. You may also want to know, if you only own one property or fewer than two, and you're not in the business of housing, you may also want to know about the Idaho Human Rights Act, which is very similar to the Fair Housing Act. And I think in 15 minutes, it's really hard to give a pretty substantive overview of those laws, but I think it's important to know that these are the things that I need to know about, and then attend a training. And all of these I will upload information about, including the laws on these specific topics. But I think it's important to at least know the Fair Housing Act, the Idaho Landlord Tenant Act, and the Idaho Human Rights Act, and one additional one, and that is the Consumer Protection Act. Because a lot of transactions do require either fair lending, fair credit reporting, and or some sort of consumer protection issue. The other one that is near and dear to my heart, and I think Deanna Watson will speak to that, is the Section 8 program. I think what the important thing here is that you know your rights, and if you're a consumer or a tenant, you know your obligations and your rights. So I think on both sides, that's really critically important. And I think it's also important to attend training. So we give training yearly on fair housing, landlord, tenant, both basics and hot topics, but I have colleagues through Idaho Legal Aid, Idaho Housing and Finance Association, HUD, various landlord associations, also through the Idaho State Bar. We all provide training, and a lot of it is being done free, particularly during COVID, the pandemic, because it's so critical that people have this information. But before you go into anything, I'm just going to strongly suggest that you know what your obligations are and your rights. And I'll superficially kind of go through those, and then it's just important that you follow up with an additional training. I think the other point is that this effort by the city of Boise and my colleagues through ADU Simplified and our esteemed panelists is really innovative. I cannot tell you enough about how many tenants are cost burden, but also homeowners who may need, additional income. And somebody put in the chat right now about, they were concerned about these individual ADUs becoming, rentals and or vacation rentals. And I think that is really a concern for a lot of people, that maybe this will just create higher rents and will not be offered to people in the community that need them. And I think Deanna may touch a little bit on that with the amazing Section 8 programs that are matched with foundations and these wonderful bankers that are on the call. There's some programs out there that are already being done. They're fully accessible housing, and they're affordable to people who are extremely low income, and even middle income. And so I think that's there's like a variety of ways to create these projects using ADUs. The first thing, if you are a landlord or tenant, is that it's very critical to have a rental agreement. Under the landlord-tenant law, you have rights and obligations with rules, and I think it's really important before that the limits under your city, whether there are caps on application fees. That's critically important. You need to also remember that your budget, you should only spend 30 to 40% of your income, transportation and parking, and those types of things, utilities on housing. So that's really important that you be able to have a budget that complies. And if you ever have questions, you're certainly welcome to contact us or Idaho Legal Aid or Idaho Housing and Finance or another counseling agency. A lot of times your property manager or your owner can answer those questions, both with lease obligations. If you need a repair, there's a 3-day demand for repairs. There's also a 3-day demand if you violate the lease. So everything has to be in writing, and you are required to give notice if you're the housing provider. And if you're requesting a repair, you're required to give notice. And then, as always, there is a due process procedure. That means you have to go through court in order to get resolution to something. So once you give a notice, whether it's a 3-day for repairs or a 3-day for non-payment of rent or some other lease violation, then there would be a period of time where you have to be served with a summons and complaint unless a 30-day notice is required. So that's those are some things, as you know, that everything typically has to be in writing and has to be done according to service. So that's really critically important. And you can look at this information. I think one of the best websites for getting more landlord-tenant information is Idaho Legal Aid. Again, I'm going to put it in the chat, but there may be other resources through your state bar association or your if you belong to a landlord association, which I think is probably a good idea, or you can go through our website. For fair housing, again, I would also recommend that you know your rights and obligations. It's critically important that under the Federal Fair Housing Act, people are protected in housing transaction, whether it's a rental, a sale, lending, or a housing program, based on race, color, religion, national origin, sex, disability, and the presence of children under the age of 18. It's really important, as Mel talked about, if you want to improve accessibility or you don't have the resources to improve accessibility, between Intermountain Fair Housing Council and the disability rights organizations out there, there are some really amazing resources. In fact, to actually get help getting modifications like ramps and grab bars and widening of doors and things. If your tenant has Medicaid or other federal resources, they may be able to get those resources for free or at low cost. So please don't hesitate to reach out to us, because a lot of times people think because they can't afford it, they can't do it. And that's not necessarily the case. I think it's really critically important when you are in a landlord-tenant agreement, not only to have everything in writing, but also to give receipts and give notices in writing and to keep them in a file. You need to document everything. Whether you're the tenant or the landlord, documentation is critically important. It helps us problem solve. And I'm going to say the first thing that you can do is just talk to one another. If you don't talk to each other, whether you're a landlord or a tenant, a lot of times when we get a call, whether it's a landlord-tenant housing program, I'll say, did you talk to them? And a lot of times they didn't, or they're afraid, right? And I think when you're afraid to talk about things, that's where you might get a mediator involved, or someone to problem solve with you. And if you want to contact us or Christina Miller HUD or your landlord association or somebody like that that could, just be your sounding board. I think that's really critically important, just going through the process. And then at the end of a landlord-tenant relationship, you want to make sure that you give proper 30-day notice to move out, and or if the landlord is wanting to no longer rent to you, they too will have to give you a written 30-day notice. And there may be other rights and obligations if you receive federal funds or something of that nature. And Deanna Watson, my colleague, is an expert on that. She'll give you more information, but you have additional rights if you're receiving federal monies, rights and obligations. And so both the landlord and the tenant goes both ways. And so it's a really nice program to fit with an ADU because it makes having ADUs more affordable. And I think I can't stress enough that at any point in time, if you ever have questions, feel free to contact one of us on this panel. But certainly at the end, when you're trying to do things right, or you're going toward eviction, or someone asks for under the Fair Housing Act a reasonable accommodation or a modification, go through that dialogue. Discussion is probably the most important thing, and don't just say no. Make sure that you get all the facts. And if it's something where you don't know how to address it, contact us or contact your attorney or contact, someone that you know is very knowledgeable about fair housing or landlord tenant or consumer protection. And then at the very end, when you've given your proper 30-day notices and you do that move out inspection, which you should do, and you should document things. You need to document things when people move in. You need to document things when people move out. Is keep copies for your records, and then typically the security deposit should be returned within 21 days or 30 if provided by the lease. So those are kind of the guidelines. Certainly the landlord can be more protective and give longer, but those are some things that if there's damages or they give you an itemized list of other charges that they may be legally able to charge, you will be given an itemization of those charges. And so again, I just really want to encourage, going over this quickly, but in addition to our resources, both Idaho Legal Aid, Intermountain Fair Housing, HUD, Idaho Housing and Finance Association, and your landlord organizations or your attorney, the other place to look is the Idaho Attorney General's Office. They have a very comprehensive guidance on this, and it's really well written. They typically update it every year. I really think it's a good resource. Again, we'll put these in the chat, and then I will provide a resource. And I would also say that if you are addressing a federal housing program, whether it's rural housing or you're getting a voucher from Boise City Ada County Housing Authority or another housing authority, is they are the experts on this. And I think Deanna will give us some additional information on that. But the greatest thing about all that you're doing is that you're giving people housing choice. And that's the beauty and the spirit of the Fair Housing Act was to give people equal and just opportunity to housing. And ADUs have been the thing that have been missing in our community and all over the state. And I'm seeing this I want to say this really amazing movement. And it really makes me, it gives me joy to see that here we are of all different practices coming together to say this is something we're committed to. We want to make this happen. And whether we're lenders or property managers or housing providers or tenants or advocacy organizations, we're here for you. And we're going to be a resource. And don't feel like you're going to go into this alone. I think knowledge is power, and I'm going to do everything I can to get you this because I would not be committed to ADU Simplified if I didn't think this is an option we should have in our community. And so that's basically the short of my conversation here, and I'll add these things to the chat. Does anybody have any questions or anything they want to bring up? I noticed there's some stuff in the chat. So somebody asked, are there controls to put in place so ADUs don't become short-term rentals? Sure, there are. That would be something that the city, county, or state would have to regulate. We are an infamous Delined rule state, which means that the state did not give us the power to regulate it. We can't do it, but there may be powers within our police and public health and welfare powers where it may allow us to regulate regulate ADUs as short-term rentals. That has been done in other Delined rule states. So that would be a really good question. for our, city, county, and state leaders. How can we address that concern? I do know that it is a concern of a lot of people. Is there an additional question? I'm looking in here. Sorry, I'm just checking to make sure. I don't see any additional questions. If you do, please, go ahead.
I was just going to say, at the risk of overstepping my bounds, it looks like Susan somehow became disconnected again from the conversation. So I know from the agenda here that Deanna was going to go next. So whatever the right segue is between the two of you, again, I don't mean to step on any toes.
I just want to introduce Deanna Watson, Executive Director of the Boise City Ada County Housing Authority. She is fantastic. I'm excited to hear her speak. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Zoanne. Can you all hear me all right? Okay. I should just have Zoanne do my part. Really appreciate all the references. And what I wanted to do today was just sort of hit upon about 5 areas in looking at ADUs and rental assistance. First of all, really look at the financial considerations. Susan did a great job. I loved the pictures of the before and after, but somehow that has to be financed. And there's the construction and permitting costs, there's material and labor costs, there's ongoing maintenance costs. And you look at that compared to what can you reap in income from the rental of the unit. And that leads me into the potential role for a public housing authority like the Boise City and Ada County housing authorities to assist on the income side through one of its programs, most likely the Housing Choice Voucher or Section 8 program. And then connected to that one, just kind of go over some of the real basics of the, we're going to focus on the Housing Choice Voucher program, what the features are, what the benefits are, what the restrictions are. And then a little bit on the key stats, looking at, I think we're all very well aware, pretty painfully aware of the current housing conditions in Boise. Not that the conditions are bad, but the prices are so high and they are shutting out a lot of lower income families from being able to access decent, safe, and sanitary housing. So the ADU model is one that's very attractive to me as director of the housing authorities, and talk a little bit about how those might connect and what the benefits of that might be, as well as some of the drawbacks. And then just a little bit about some of the developing programs, connecting.
Okay. I'm back in now.
Okay, developing the connection, the kind of formalized connection between ADUs and rental assistance programs. And I should mention that I have been director here for coming up on 24 years and about 5 years before that at Idaho Housing and Finance Association. So I'm beginning to think this might be my career. So, so in looking at income stream considerations, there are 2 distinct categories of costs that I could think of right off the top of my head in considering ADUs. Obviously the construction, and I had construction twice, and finance related, then operations, maintenance, capital needs, and then ongoing debt service. And right now, rent pricing in the open market provides very attractive prospects for covering costs and producing net income. Negotiations in the good old American way remain between 2 parties, a willing landlord and a willing and financially sound tenant. The upside is rent level at whatever the current market will allow. And the risk is there is little or no safety net should a tenant become unable to pay rent through financial setbacks. And, we all are subject to life circumstances changing, and what we might have been able to cover yesterday or last month something can happen and all of a sudden we can't cover it today. And that's a risk to a tenant, and that's also a risk to a landlord. So that's, I think, something that we have to think about if we're looking into being an owner of an ADU and we want to reap the highest rent possible, is that there is a little safety net should something happen, an illness, an accident, a divorce, a death, that somebody all of a sudden can't pay their rent. And will there be enough in reserves to cover what could end up being months, leading to the possibility of costs and the time associated with going through a painful eviction process? So in the income stream considerations and the market rent scenario, obviously an owner will need to factor in income loss should a tenant stop paying. Those costs come in the forms of lost rent money, but also in the worst case scenarios, court and legal costs associated with eviction processes and repairs and restoration costs and returning the unit to its rent-ready status. Add to that, in this current market, moratoriums on evictions for non-payment of rent. A landlord can't collect rent and can't stop the losses as long as the moratoriums continue. So we had a moratorium that ended in July, and then in early September, the Centers for Disease Control implemented a new moratorium on evictions for non-payment of rent, and that runs through the end of December. And there may or may not be another one after that. But what that has done is it has provided some assistance to families who may have found themselves out of work because of COVID-related issues, who no longer can pay their rent. And at least until the end of December, they are in a protected status. Once January 1 comes, though, they will need to pay up on their rent and continue paying it after that, or risk the opportunity or the risk of being sent to eviction court. With the backlog that is forming on evictions and the current practice of tenants requesting jury trials, which will extend that time out further, a landlord could go many, many months, thousands and thousands of dollars without being able to collect rent. And we know that over 50% of landlords are the smaller landlords who maybe have, 1 to 15 units, and the income that they collect off of that housing is really the income that they live on. And so if they can't collect the rent, maybe they can't pay the mortgage, their situation begins to crumble beneath their feet as well. So that's an area that I think, 7 months ago or 8 months ago, we saw these steadily rising rent levels, and it just seemed like there was no end in sight. And then the pandemic came, and we've seen so many things change that have really rocked areas that you wouldn't think of unless you were working in or living in that condition. Another option besides charging what the market will bear in order to reap the highest return is to consider accepting tenants on rental assistance. So the downside is the rent received will be less than the market average, but will provide an assurance of rent every month, even if the tenant loses income. So your financial pro forma, if you're the builder owner of an ADU, will of course help you decide whether trading a portion of income for some added security is a viable option. And so I guess the only thing I wanted to add about that is that's an area where I think there's a contrast that we can see between charging as much as the market will bear and not having a safety net versus a housing authority program that will make up the difference in what the tenant can no longer pay. But before I get into some of the basics of rental assistance programs that we administer, I thought it might be helpful to set a bit of a foundation and explain what a public housing authority is and define it. So in the broadest sense, public housing authorities, or PHAs, administer programs and projects to assist people of limited income with affordable housing. And that's the broad base. Public housing authorities are established in state statutes. PHAs are neither departments of local governments, even though our name makes it sound like we probably are a division of Boise City and a division of Ada County. We're the Boise City and Ada County Housing Authorities. And we're not nonprofits, like, for instance, like a Boise neighborhood or NeighborWorks of Boise is. We are considered quasi-governmental entities, and we're established by state statute to perform certain essential governmental functions on behalf of the federal government in the jurisdictions that we serve. And for us, that's the city of Boise and all the communities in Ada County. So the state statutes, as I mentioned, create public housing authorities, and there's several pages of definition and purposes, but I thought I would boil it down to, under the findings of necessity, that there are areas that are insanitary and unsafe dwellings, and there's a shortage of safe and sanitary housing at affordable rates, and that the conditions cannot be relieved by private enterprise alone. The work of a housing authority is for the good of the public and for which public funding is used. And I would add that if the private market could find a way to make a profit on this, they would have done so already. And so that's where public works for public good come in, and that's why public housing authorities were created. And we have the capacity and the legal authority to do clearance work, reconstruction, new construction. We can purchase, we can donate, and we can have local governments donate properties to us. And for instance, in recent years, we received a loan from the city, a temporary loan, to purchase the Nez Perce apartments. This is about 20 years ago. And then we issued bonds on a number of properties we own and manage. And when we got the bond financing, we paid the city back, and we returned apartments that had fallen into great disrepair with lots of illegal activity and horrible living conditions back into decent, safe, and sanitary, affordable housing. And we added some additional units on that property in addition to the ones that we fixed up. So those are some of the basics of public housing authorities and the necessity of them. Our purposes, we're a unique entity. The bulk of our funding is federal, and compliance is covered by federal regulations. However, PHAs also have the authority to issue revenue bonds and conduit bonds to help finance affordable housing. The Civic Plaza apartments next to the courthouse, we did a conduit bond financing for that development, and in exchange, they agreed to keep at least 40 of their 299 units available for Section 8 voucher holders. And the last time I checked, we were between 80 and 85. We're governed by a board of commissioners appointed by local government. We administer rental assistance programs, own and manage low rent public housing, and can own and manage market and low income housing tax credit properties as well. So we have in addition to the voucher programs and some of the other supportive housing programs that we administer, we have about another 400 units that we own and manage as landlords as well on the open market, but at an affordable range of rents. So now a little bit about Boise City and Ada County housing authorities. As I mentioned, we're two agencies under one roof, but we're separate. Those are separate legal PHAs. We operate with the same staff, and the governing board is appointed by the mayor of Boise and the Ada County commissioners in alternating appointment and confirmation processes. We administer a number of programs and own and manage a portfolio of affordable housing, as I said. We also own and maintain Allenbaugh House, which is the region's no-charge subacute mental health and detoxification facility. And there's an example of land that the city had through community development block grant funds. They transferred that land over to the Housing Authority with their direction that they would like us to design, oversee construction, and then own and manage the facility of this detox and subacute mental health facility. Terry Riley operates it. They do the tough part, but it helps us as a housing authority get to some of the core issues that cause people to need affordable housing. And so we're really proud of the work we do there. And then we also own and maintain our own admin and maintenance facilities. Our Housing Choice Voucher program is the largest of our agency, and it's also commonly referred to as the Section 8 program. Last year, we paid area landlords over $1 million a month, about $12.5 million for the year, assisting over 2,000 families with rent and utilities in Boise and the communities that reside in Ada County. So in this program, renters pay between 30 and 40% of their income for rent and utilities. And then our agency pays the difference to pay what the tenant portion doesn't, up to a maximum set and annually renewed HUD formula. The Section 8 program, or Housing Choice Voucher program, is called tenant-based, meaning the assistance goes with the participant out into the community to connect to a property to be leased. It is also considered portable, meaning when the lease is up at one place, the assistance can go with the tenant to the next. That's contrasted by, if you're familiar at all with the New Path housing in Valor Point that just opened in August, Valor Point for homeless veterans, New Path for long-term chronically homeless people. And that assistance that we pay for those two projects is called project-based. So we pay the operating costs through our rental assistance, but the rental assistance stays with those properties. Rent levels are set by bedroom size. So for every bedroom size that is attached to a voucher and attached to a family, there's a set amount of rent, a ceiling really of what the rent can be for that family. If the rent is a little bit higher and either the landlord isn't willing to negotiate or the tenant has some additional income that they could pay, another $50 or $100 a month, as long as they don't go over 40% of their income, they can choose to rent something that's a little bit higher than that 30%, that floor. Properties must pass basic housing quality standards, and we have inspectors on staff who, when a unit is ready for connecting to a lease, we go out and inspect the property, and it's really basic safety standards. It's not anything that should be too costly. There are some times when, we require all 4 burners to be working on a stove and a tenant says, I don't cook, I don't care. We still have to fail it for that. Common errors or failings are inadequate egress, not having a filtering system and, a fan or a window in the bathroom, locks on the windows, smoke detector, probably number 1, not having them in working order, but really the basics of what any of us would want to have in safety in our homes. And then the Housing Authority monitors income and household composition and the fluctuations, and then we make adjustments at least annually. Right now, if a family has an income increase, we are not doing an interim adjustment. So we aren't raising the rent until their next annual to kind of help them maybe get a little bit of a safety net built back under them until the next annual. But if their income goes down, then we do an interim adjustment as quickly as we can so that their rent portion goes down and the housing assistance goes up. We employ housing representatives who each carry a caseload in the Housing Choice Voucher Program of 250 to 300 families. Household composition and income must be recertified annually, as I said, and then the interim recertification process. And then if there's evidence of serious lease violations, unauthorized residence, fraud, criminal like drug or violent activity, the Housing Authority is obligated to launch into an investigation and based on the findings, initiate follow-up action. We can also be a partner to the landlord if there are concerns about whether there's damages being done to the unit. There's somebody who's staying there on a regular basis and they haven't approved, the landlord hasn't approved them. If there have been lease violations, we request that landlords send us a copy when they send it to the tenants so we can follow up with the tenants and really be part of the team to help people be as successful as possible. So the goal of the program is to assist very low income families, the elderly and disabled, to access decent, safe and sanitary housing in the private market. The applicants must be income qualified. The selected housing must meet minimum housing quality standards. And when a program participant finds a willing owner and landlord, we first must determine whether the rent amount requested falls within our payment standards. You'll often hear also the term fair market rent. And those are based on HUD formula that is adjusted on an annual basis for every market area in the United States. So if the asking rent fits within HUD's program parameters and the landlord is willing to accept a tenant receiving assistance and that housing passes HQS, the housing quality standards, then the landlord enters into a lease with the tenant and a housing assistance payments contract or HAP contract with the Housing Authority. The tenant is responsible for meeting the terms of the lease and the assistance program and for paying 30 to 40% of their income toward rent and utilities. The Housing Authority is responsible for paying the balance owed directly to the landlord and to fulfilling its obligations under the HAP contract. So I think the key for me, especially right now, in talking about the value of our program is if a landlord is renting to somebody on a housing assistance contract and that family either is divided by death, divorce, somebody loses their job and now they have zero income, we'll make up the difference. As their income goes down, our rent goes up, so the landlord stays whole on the rent. And I think that's critical, especially right now. So I think I may have just talked ahead of the screen. And one of the other features is that the Housing Authority can be a bridge between the landlord and the tenant. So we talked a little bit about that partnership. And you know, if a landlord has a tenant who is causing a lot of problems and a lot of damage and there's serious lease violations, the tenant not only runs the risk of being evicted, but also of losing the assistance program that they need in order to access affordable housing. So there's kind of a double whammy to the kinds of things that can get people in trouble. And then I wanted to just bring up this slide, which is just showing the average rents in the Metro Boise area, and it ends in June of 2020. And so I think you'll see would continue to kind of trend upward, but with some peaks and valleys along the way. So it starts in June of 2017, and these are just average across bedroom sizes, but it's difficult for people that have adequate income. It's almost impossible for people that don't have enough money to pay for all the costs of just surviving from month to month. And then the single family categories of rents and the multifamily and what we're seeing, I think this is current within about the last 2 or 3 months as well. And then if you look at what is considered affordability or affordable rents in Boise, so rents at 30% or below household income are typically considered affordable. In fact, many property management companies require an income of at least 2.5 to 3 times the asking rent. Based on US Census data, the median household income in Ada County is $63,137. That would be for a family of 4, meaning that an affordable rent for them would be about $1,578. So a family of 4, you can see the like a 3-bedroom rent in multifamily. It's within the range of what they could do. A little bit tougher in a house. And then if you look at our program, I've listed here our payment standards, which became effective on October 1, 2020. And so this is the cap on what the Housing Authority can pay per bedroom size. And then the tenant can pay between 30 and 40% of their income. And so if they have income and they can pay a little more than 30, our cap ends at the $683 mark for a studio, at $1,420 for a 3-bedroom. And then the 30% calculation is done. And then if the rent is a little bit higher and the tenant has the income and wants to use it for that, they can throw that in as long as they don't go over 40%. So if you look back at 3-bedroom rents in multifamily, 1,402, and 3-bedroom, 1,420. So we're getting closer to being able to meet really what's going on in the market. But I need to add that this is for rent and utilities. So whatever the tenant portion of utilities is gets folded into that amount as well. And then the income limits that apply to people getting into our program. So the 80% applies just to public housing, and so that doesn't really come in to bear on the Section 8 program. And I will add that HUD requires that 70% of our new admissions have to be people who are making 30% or less in under median income. So a family of 4 would be 26,200 or less. And so at 30%, without our assistance, they could maybe pay over the course of a year lease, maybe $300 a month in rent, and there isn't anything to be found at that. And so they might move down to a 2-bedroom or, trying to squeeze into a smaller unit to try to save money. Doubling up is happening, those kinds of things that all add to really the precariousness of living conditions for all of us in the community, and especially those who are trying to make it on very little. And so that's where the benefit of our program comes in, is that they pay their 30%, we pay the difference, but we are dependent at all times on there being affordable housing and landlords who are willing to work with our program to enable people to get into decent housing without having to pay everything they've got just for their rent. And then I was just going to end with a little bit about some of the programs that are being developed around the country. And so far, the ones that seem to be making the most progress, there's some in Texas and Arizona, but the ones I've pulled up are in the Los Angeles area, and in Pasadena, they have some similarities. And basically it's financial support for homeowners who want to build or remodel structures into ADU housing, and they get an advantage in the financing in exchange for agreeing to rent to voucher holders for, say, up to 5-year period. There's also a HUD accessory dwelling unit case study guide that's, I want to say around maybe 40 to 50 pages long, And then there's another publication that I'll have to download. I neglected to write that whole part in, but it's accessory dwelling units as affordable housing. So that's sort of my overview, and I'd be happy to try to answer any questions.
Somebody asked, Deborah asked if a Section 8 voucher could be used with a studio floor plan. I'm wondering if you could answer that question.
Yes, that would be the studio rent. And so I think that was the 683. If there's a dwelling unit that has a bedroom, then as long as it has, I think it's about 70 square feet, walls, window, door, closet, then it would qualify as a one bedroom, and then we jump up to that one bedroom level.
Thank you so much, Deanna. Very comprehensive information. We are a little past our time, so I need to have Susan and Skip please give us as much information as they can about financing, please, both new construction and renovation.
Susan, why don't you go first?
Well, Skip, I was going to offer to you. I've had the microphone for a little bit, so let me defer to you and ask you to go first.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And first of all, I want to say that it's not just ADUs have multiple purposes. And one of them is I'm a recent, I just recently completed a successful 30-year marriage and relocated from Southern California to Northern California. And I ended up in a basement ADU near Mills College with a spectacular view of the San Francisco Bay. And I downsized dramatically. I'm living in about 10% of the space I used to live in. I lived in a 3,500 square foot house. Now I'm in a 350 square foot ADU. And I love it. I love it. I've got a spectacular deck, and that's probably the deck with the view is what's great. So, you know, people going through transitions, relationship transitions, people have lost their homes due to fires. So ADUs have just a lot of real benefits. So I'm going to touch on, unless you have cash is the best way to build an ADU. If you don't have cash and you have to find money to build it, there's some loan options. So I'm going to talk about a few of them: home equity lines of credit, also known as HELOCs, cash out refinances, reverse mortgages, and renovation loans. So before I get started, we're in I call it the bracketed COVID-19 lending time. And there's a lot of restrictions. There's restrictions on home equity line of credits. There's restrictions on cash out refinances. And there's also restrictions on FHA and VA renovation loans. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about a home equity line of credit. The challenge that we're having right now is most banks, if they're doing home equity line of credit, will only lend up to 80% of the value. And so if you have a lot of equity, then that'll work. For instance, if you have a home that's worth $800,000 and you have an existing loan of about $400,000, 80% of $800,000 is $640,000, and so that's going to give you about $240,000 worth of equity that you can tap into to build an ADU. HELOCs are adjustable, and they're a second, and they're generally tied to the prime rate. So if that doesn't work out, there's also cash out refinances, and again, there's restrictions right now. Lots of lenders are restricting the LTV on the loan to value on cash out refinances. Same thing, if you had a scenario like that, you can get about 240 grand cash to build your ADU. The benefit is you're getting one loan that's a 30-year fixed loan. You don't have to deal with two loans that you would have with a home equity line of credit. Reverse mortgages are great for homeowners that are 62 years or older. And, there's so much fear around it. And I think, from 10 or 15 years ago, they weren't structured well, and seniors lost their homes. there's safeguards in, HUD put in safeguards to protect the homeowners. And it's really a nice way to live out your life without having to worry about making a mortgage payment. And so the amount of funds that are available through reverse mortgage they're based on some variables. The variables are the life expectancy of the youngest borrower, the homeowner, and they look at an actuary table based on the life expectancy. They look at the home value and they look at the current interest rate. And based on that, they give you a number of what you qualify for. And then there's multiple options for disbursement. So some of the options, there's three options. There's a lump sum. You can get a check written from the mortgage company. You can get a home equity line of credit that you can tap into or write a check as you need it. Or you can get a monthly payment. And there's two types of monthly payments, a term or a tenure. A term is for a specific period of time. Let's say you want, $5,000 a month, and that's going to, you'll be able to do that for 3 or 4 or 5 years. Or a tenure is based on what's available. You'll get that amount forever as long as you're alive and living in that property. So again, protections have been put in place to minimize the senior's chance to lose their home. The only way that they can lose their home is if they don't pay their property taxes, and we want to make sure that they have money left over for homeowners insurance and upkeep. So an example is if the value of the home is $800,000, and let's say they currently owe about $100,000 and their monthly payment is about $800 a month. It's really a life changer, because what we're able to do is based on just a sample of a 75-year-old with the current interest rates, available funds might be around $500,000. So after they pay off the current loan, which is $100,000, they'll have $400,000 available, where they can get a home equity line for $250,000, and they can get a monthly 10-year lifetime payment of $900 a month. So they're going from paying $800, which they'll have no more house payment, and they will never have a house payment again, to getting an income of $900 for the rest of their life. So if someone's house rich and cash poor, they don't have enough income, they don't have a pension, or the Social Security isn't really providing enough income to live comfortably, this can make a huge difference in their lifestyle by having that extra money. And they can build that ADU, they can move into the ADU and rent out their main house and generate additional income there too. So a reverse mortgage is something that homeowners should consider. Renovation loans are also a great way to finance additions like ADUs. So they're available for purchase or refinance. And the appraisal, what's different is the appraisal is based on the future as completed value of the home. So it's okay to use renovation loans for remodels, adding on ADUs, whether they're an attached ADU or a detached ADU. Depending on the scenario, a conventional renovation loan can be used for a detached ADU, where an FHA renovation loan cannot be used for a detached, but it can be used for an attached. There's again a moratorium right now on the VA renovation loans. The VA doesn't want to risk their veterans or their VA appraisers from getting COVID. So there's a freeze on VA appraisals. So for the time being, we're not doing VA renovation loans. So if you had, let's say, a current equity of $150,000 based on the current value of your home is $500, let's say you owe about $350. You can't get all that equity with a cash out refinance. If you can get an 80% LTV loan, that's going to only give you about $50,000, which is the difference between $400,000 and $350, which is your loan balance. So you're not going to be able to build an ADU with $50,000. But doing a renovation loan based on the as completed value, and we don't have a lot of time to talk about the challenges that we're seeing with the appraisals, but you can build a $150,000 ADU and the appraiser may only give it $50,000 of equity. And so that really varies until we get more sales and we get comparable sales with single family residents with the ADUs with a higher value. They're coming in pretty conservative. So let's assume the as completed value is 550. We can lend on a conventional loan. We can do a renovation loan up to 95% of that future value. So 95% of 550 is 510. It's actually a little more than 510, but the current loan limit in Boise, Idaho is 510,400. And so that's going to give you $160,000, which should give you enough money to build an ADU. So if you add $160,000 to your loan at an interest rate of about 3.5%, what does that do to your expense? Your expenses, it's going to increase your mortgage payment by about $720. And I did this research, and it looks like based on the Deanna's numbers earlier, I'm pretty close. Renting a 2-bedroom, 1-bath, 800 square foot ADU should rent for somewhere around $1,500 a month. So that's going to give you positive cash flow of over $700 a month. And again, depending on what your use is, what your plan is, if you want to rent it out, it'll give you some positive cash flow. But if you want to put a family member in, you'll put them in their own separate entrance, whether it's a parent or a grandparent or a kid returning from college that's maybe starting a family. That's going to only cost about $800 a month in additional expenses. So the renovation loan process, it's pretty simple. You want to get pre-approved based on your income. You cannot use proposed rental income from an ADU to help qualify for a mortgage. That's a question I get quite often. Can I use the proposed rental income to qualify for that additional renovation money that I need? And the answer is no. Fannie Mae FHA is not allowing that. Whether that's going to come in the future sometime, who knows, but it's not available now. Meet with your architect and your design team, prepare your plans, get your plans approved by the city, get a bid from a contractor. The appraiser needs the plans and the bid to do the renovation to complete the as completed value, or the ARV, the as repaired value. And then we lend based on the lesser of the all the costs associated with, or the as completed value. And once we close the loan, the renovation work begins. The contractor is paid as the work is completed and inspected by a third-party construction manager. So we make sure that the flow of money going to the contractor is based on the work that's actually completed. So it's nice to have a firewall between the homeowner, the homeowner, and your money, and the contractor. You've got the bank construction manager who approves those draws. And that's pretty much it. I know it's not a lot of time, but I just wanted to touch on some high-level points regarding the home equity lines of credit, cash out refinances, reverse mortgages, and renovation loans. My name is Skip Shanker. I'm the renovation sales manager for representative is Carter Bianchi, who is in Idaho, and there's his contact information if you want to reach him. So I'm going to go and stop sharing, and it's all yours, Susan.
Great. Thanks a lot, Skip. Nice job. As you might imagine, there's a lot of similarity between Skip's information and my information. So some of mine I will skip over because I know that we're beyond our schedule as well. But let me hop over here really quick to our presentation here. So just some information about construction options for ADUs. Umpqua Bank has a long history in the construction and renovation space. In fact, it would be fair to say that we've got an industry recognized program. Last year, we did about $1 billion in construction and renovation financing, and ADUs has always been a piece of what we've done. Some of the hallmarks for us is a very broad suite of products that allows consumers to build a brand new ADU, do renovation of an existing structure like a garage or an internal ADU like we talked about previously. And one of our hallmarks is that everything is done under one roof at Umpqua. From the project review, we have the certified loan officers who go through a year's worth of training to be certified to do the lending, all the way through the draw process. Everything is done internally. So we're able to keep a touch point with that ADU owner through the entire process. Again, like I stated, both renovation and new construction, and just depending on the individual customer and the individual product, we can definitely accommodate ADUs under many, many of our construction programs. I wanted to just give a quick highlight about how the loans come together. There's 3 parts. Almost everybody is familiar with the credit approval. The loan application works like every other loan application for any home loan. All the same documentation is required there. In addition to that, we also review the builder to make sure that they have appropriate experience for the project that we're being asked to finance. And then we also review the project for a budget viability. We look at the costs to make sure that there's adequate money to build what the customer is hoping to build, and that it has all of the parts that are required. It's difficult to complete a project if we forgot to include any money for plumbing, for example. So we like to take a really thorough look at that, make sure there's enough profit and overhead described in the project, and so on. This roadmap kind of describes what happens in the process, and it can be a little bit different from consumer to consumer. And Kevin Spencer, whose contact information I'll put at the end of this slide deck, has this information that he would be very happy to email to you, talk to you over the phone about, whatever the case. But it just kind of gives a roadmap of what happens during the process. At Umpqua, we can process a construction loan application as quickly as 17 days from application until the day that we fund, if we have all the complete paperwork that we need. Some of our consumers take a very long time to decide what they're going to do, and we've worked with customers up to 3 years from the time we started talking to them until we fund a loan. So it's really adaptable to anybody's desire to hop forward quickly or to really take their time and study as they go along. Our funds disbursement for anyone who's on the building side, right now we're doing draws in an average of about 1.97 days. So when the work is complete on the project, we're able to get money dispersed very quickly so that builders are able to make their payments that are going to come due by the 10th of each month. Like Skip mentioned, we have essentially the same array of products. I will say that at Umpqua, we don't offer the reverse mortgages, and for certain customers, that is an absolute brilliant solution. As long as it's used responsibly and properly, it's a very, very good solution. I think one of the benefits that Umpqua has is our access to our portfolio, which is the bank's money that we loan. And we use that program very broadly because of its flexibility and adaptability to many project types, as well as customers. I will say that we have some expanded capability now to be able to do financing for site-built ADUs, modular-built ADUs, and manufactured or HUD code ADUs. So our suite of offerings, it is about as broad as you can get really throughout the nation. I do want to take a moment to talk about some of the challenges that we're experiencing on the appraisal front. As Skip alluded to, banks and lenders, I should say more broadly, use what's called the sales comparable approach when they are looking at the appraised value of the property. And because ADUs are a relatively new addition to properties, there are not a lot of them that have sold. People are beginning to build them, but there's not a lot of properties that have sold with an ADU. And that's how an appraiser will determine what the contributory value of that ADU is to the subject property. There was a study done in Portland recently where we have probably the highest concentration of ADUs in almost the entire country. And one of the really star appraisers here did a study where they determined that an ADU is bringing about 30% of the cost of the ADU. It's adding about 30% of that to the project. That's not the case in every case, but I think what it does is really bring about a reality that cost does not always equal value. If someone's adding an ADU that cost $150,000, it's unlikely that it will bring that full value. So I just want people to be cautious when they think about getting dollar for dollar. It's not unlike a kitchen remodel that would bring 75 to 85% of the cost of that addition or renovation to the property. So just be aware of that. I also too wanted to address the use of rental income. Right now, there is only one program that allows for income from a subject property, and that's only allowable if it's an existing ADU in most cases. So we're still struggling with that. There may be some accommodation as regulations change over time. We're very hopeful that we will have some accommodations and flexibility in this space. But as you are coaching clients to add ADUs, unfortunately, we are not able to calculate that rental income when we determine if they qualify for a new payment from a loan that they may have received to build the ADU. I just want to wrap up. Kevin Spencer is our local loan representative there in the Boise market and beyond. His footprint is much broader than Boise, but I'll leave this slide up for just a moment so that you can capture his information. He would be very happy to talk to you about any of your construction needs, including adding an ADU or converting a space on your property. So those are all the comments that I have, and I'd be happy to take any questions if you have them.
Question came up earlier. I think it was addressed about short-term vacation rentals. I think that got answered. There's a resource. Seems like all housing in Boise is at risk of becoming short-term vacation rentals. There's a resource link in the chat box. Seriously, if owners are allowed to add an ADU and instead of improving the housing market, can they exacerbate the problem, allowing Boise to become a vacation rental for out-of-state owners? So yeah, it seems like there's a lot of concern. People have concerns about converting ADUs into vacation rentals.
Mm-hmm.
I know in some areas of the country, they do require that anybody moving into it has to be there for at least 30 days. So it does not allow for vacation rentals. And I don't know how that is, if that's the case in Boise or in Portland, but I know in Southern California and Northern California, they've put those requirements in. So what do we get?
I'll just add really quick there if I can. I know that one of the speakers was talking about something called a Delined rule, and it sounded like the city was not able to put those kind of restrictions on their units, that it might need to be something at a state level. But with many voices can make change. So if that's something that's important to the citizens of Boise and beyond, with some really good elbow grease, anything is possible, I guess I would say.
Yeah, so Zoanne put a bunch of contact information in for resources. So that's what a lot of the chat was about. There's a question: if an adult child moves in with a family who is Section 8 housing, do they need to report his presence? And if so, does that make the difference in the rent to the family pays? So
Deanna would be good at answering that one. Deanna, Can you come back on?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yes, adding a household member takes the approval of both the landlord and the housing authority, and any income that household member has gets counted then into the family income and likely would adjust the family's portion of the rent.
good, thank you. Thanks, Deanne. Let's see. I think that's it.
Yeah,
That's it. Great.
great. Let's see, I can see.
Skip
there's
it, Susan.
Yep.
Deborah asked, what are some of the other specs for an ADU priced at about 160,000 and then question mark and over garage question mark? Just wanted to make sure we got that one answered, since you guys are better able to answer that than any of us.
Yep. And can you repeat the question? Are you asking what are the specs? Was that the
Yeah,
question?
so in the Q&A, it was asked, what are the other specs, maybe specifications for an ADU priced at about 160,000 question mark and over the garage? Like, are there differences?
In our world, there is no difference if that ADU is above the garage. We don't have any preference. We're agnostic as to what type of ADU that would be. I think the interesting thing about garage conversions is they're not as simple as on the face they may seem. Garages aren't designed and are not intended for residential living. So many times there are unexpected costs associated with beefing up framing, creating earthquake protection, floor joists that were never intended to be floor joists in the roof of the, the ceiling of the garage. So what I would say is if you are planning on a garage conversion, make sure that you understand the increased engineering and increased costs associated with a garage conversion. Most of the contractors who are doing those conversions are finding it to be more cost effective to actually demolish the garage and start from scratch.
Yeah, some of the other things to consider are bringing utilities. So sewer laterals, you have to bring sewer lateral in, bring, plumbing, water, gas. A lot of people are foregoing gas and going with electric, and putting solar on the roof, and power, bringing power to the unit. So these are some of the things that people want to consider also.
I hope that Susan is pleased with the information that was shared. I know I learned a lot today. And I hope any of you would feel free to reach out to any of the presenters who shared today. All of us are very passionate about this topic and would be happy to answer any questions. So I will take the bold move to say meeting adjourned.
Thanks, Susan. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Susan and Skip. That concludes this presentation. If you did not see our first program, Why ADUs, I encourage you to watch it. Also on Wednesday, ADU Simplified will present our third program of the series, ADU Design. Experts will explain the kinds of ADUs that might work for you, some of the code and construction considerations, and obligations to include accessibility features. Thank you for your attendance. We hope to see you next year in person at the 2021 Boise Neighborhood Interactive.